And joining me now with reaction to that interview are Jamal Simmons and Cheri Jacobus, who are here in the studio. Welcome to both of you. So what do we think of his wet paper box analogy that basically Charlie Crist is standing on very weak Democratic support that's eventually going to collapse and all those votes will come rushing to him before Election Day?
You know, I think that it's clear from this interview that he knows who his real opponent is, and that's Charlie Crist. That's the big problem for him. Everybody thought that Crist would be a problem for the Republicans. Clearly, Crist is a bigger problem for the Democrat, and that's clear. And Meeks' campaign clearly knows that, and they're clearly in a position where they don't quite know what to do about it. So that's sort of the wild card for him this year.
Why is that, Jamal? Because clearly Kendrick Meek and Charlie Crist have very, very different points of view. Why are so many Democrats, it appears, going towards Crist right now? And I should point out that the polls show that these three candidates have somewhere around 40 percentage points for Marco Rubio right now. Then you're looking at about 32 for Charlie Crist and then 23 for Kendrick Meek. He's got to make up a lot of ground.
He does, but you know what's been happening is Meek has actually been moving up. He'd been in the teens. He's now coming up into the 20s. And the more that people learn about Charlie Crist, the more of those people are starting to move over to him. He's got an uphill fight.
Don't people already know all about Charlie Crist? He's been the governor.
But here's an interesting point. The interesting point is Kendrick Meek doesn't need one single Republican vote. He only really needs Democratic votes. If he can get 85% of Democrats and a few independents who really are Democrats, but they declare themselves as independents. If he can get 85% of Democratic votes, he can win this election. The problem is he's got to battle Charlie Crist for those. So as Crist is trying to reposition himself as someone who's more moderate, Meek has to sort of define him with Democratic voters as someone who's really more conservative. He launched a very devastating ad at Charlie Crist last week, which really just talked about him being a conservative, in his own words, talking about President Bush, embracing him, all those things, which Democratic voters need to know if Kendrick Meek has any chance of trying to win this election.
Got it. So let's move on and talk about a couple of other interesting races right now, because Democrats are claiming that they're seeing something of a rebound in the polls across the country, that it's now October and their base is coming home to roost. And they point to things like the California Senate race and the Washington State Senate race, where poll numbers are improving for their candidates as proof that maybe November won't be quite as bad for them as they thought it was going to be. Nobody's saying it's going to be great for them, but they're saying maybe it won't be devastating.
It's expected that the margins would close, so the numbers would get a little bit closer in October, but the Democrats are still pretty far behind. That doesn't mean Republicans should take anything for granted. Clearly, some of these races are starting to close. The Tea Party obviously has had a tremendous impact on the elections this year. That doesn't mean it's going to be 100% for Republicans, and we still have our problems with that, some problem candidates, and some Senate seats in particular that may be lost because of the Tea Party candidates, and then but it'll be a net gain. In terms of that enthusiasm gap, though, is the term we've been hearing a lot. I think that's what you're talking about. They're saying the Democrats are coming home to roost. At this point, you've got President Obama going out campaigning, just starting out a campaign for Democrats, because they're all going to start moving left now. They have nowhere else to go. The Tea Party folks are out there enthusiastic for the Republicans for the most part. Independents tend to be breaking for the Republicans and the Tea Party candidates. Democrats don't have any new likely voters, so they have to create them by ginning up their base. That's the only place they have to go. So we're going to see things get very negative and some very far left ads that'll be coming out, I think, for the Democrats, because they have nowhere else to go.
Jamal, the DNC is saying they raised $16 million in September, and that this is proof that that enthusiasm gap is shrinking. Is that a significant figure?
It certainly is, because here's what's happening. At the same time, while the Democratic Party is saying they're raising more money, the Republican Party actually is raising less. I think as of August 30th, the RNC had about $4.7 million cash on hand. The DNC had $13.1 million. And so what happened is the RNC announced that they're not sending people out to states like they usually do in order to help work on the ground game. They're going to shift all that money into mail and television. The Democrats are doing all of those. They're doing mail, they're doing television, they're putting people on the ground. They've been on the ground doing grassroots campaigning, door-to-door, door knocking. So that's going to be helpful for people in very close races. At the same time, Cheri's talking about races. Take a look at something like the Ohio governor's race. Ted Strickland, who's the governor of Ohio, who's been really trailing by double digits against John Kasich. For 2 months this summer, John Kasich was airing ads without any answer from Ted Strickland. Now you've got Strickland on the air with ads, and that number moved up from sort of 10 or 11 points down to now he's 4 points down. So he's starting to close in. Or in California, you got Barbara Boxer, who's now 6 to 9 points ahead ahead. In Washington, Patty Murray's now 5 points ahead. Both of those races were much closer for Democrats before. I think as you start to look around the country, you're going to see not only a tightening, but Democrats getting a little bit of a lead back. I'm not saying we're going to win the entire election, but there are people who are now expected to lose who are not going to lose these races.
Well, and Cheri, I don't know if this is expectations setting, but you're starting to hear a lot of Republican campaign leaders say things like, well, we never said we were going to win back the House. We always thought it would be a good night, and it's going to be a good night for us if we even get 20 seats, and this was always going to be a strategy where we tried to retake the House in 2 election cycles, not 1. Is this because they're just trying to lower the media's expectations, or are they really dialing back their hopes for election night?
You have a lot of Republican leaders who have always known that this is an uphill battle. They've been through it before. They know that nothing is a given, and they've tried to warn the base and some of the activists. I think what we've heard over the past year or so, or at least the 6 months or so, are political leaders who are not necessarily our party leaders, thinking that this was going to be some sort of a bloodbath for the Democrats on election night. Things are looking good for Republicans, but these folks that are now saying, hey, you know, people hold back a little bit, they're smart. They know this, but they've kind of been saying that all along, but I don't think people really wanted to listen to them, but they should. The things are looking good for the House. I think the Senate is certainly not at all a given. I think the Senate will be at least a 2-cycle project for Republicans.
And now that it is October, a lot of these Republicans who had less money are finally going up on the air with their ad blitzes, and so all these numbers could change again pretty significantly, right?
They could, but you know what's been happening? These Democrats have been under the barrage of particularly the Karl Rove forces and some of these super PACs that they're being called, who've been really airing ads in a lot of these tough Democratic or tough districts. While the Republicans haven't been able to raise enough money or spend it, they've had this third-party money in these races. So now you're going to have both, but the Democrats do have a financial advantage race to race. They just don't have the same super PAC money. What's ultimately going to happen is you look around these races, you look at some place like Lincoln Davis in Tennessee. This congressman who should be in a very tough race has found an opponent who's got all kinds of issues that are coming out about his divorce papers. So people are looking at these individual candidate races, whether it's him or Stephanie Herseth in South Dakota, whose candidate's got trouble, to Travis Childers down in Mississippi, who should be losing but is not losing. They're tied. Even in the congressional races, you're seeing Democrats hold on. They're tied right now, and we're still 3 weeks out from Election Day. So we've got some time. Right,
you've always been arguing that it's about the individual races, not the national picture, and of course Republicans say the exact opposite.
Well, we still have Obamacare and that huge stimulus spending package that Democrats can't run from no matter how much money they have and how many ads they put on the air. So ultimately, I think that's going to help Republicans.
Got it. Cheri Jacobus, Jamal Simmons, thank you so much for coming in to talk about the state of the race 30 days out. Appreciate it.